Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Turkelson. Instead of yammering on in front of you in person, I'm making a little video. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of things that I asked you to do last week prior to all these snow days and all that. So I want to go over some of the basics of this book, basically. I wanted you to have like a kind of bird's eye view of the table of contents to give you a sense of what to expect. I mean, we're going to spend probably at least, a month on just part one here, which is the end of the Republic and the establishment of the Principate. So the end of the Republic in Roman history was a very politically tumultuous time, far more so than any supposed political tumultuousness that we're experiencing now with President Trump and Hillary Clinton and all that. We're talking real life and death political struggles. So it's an interesting time in Roman history, or an interesting time in world history in general, I would say. So there are three chapters that cover this. Generally, the late Republic, the fall of the Republic, and the Principate of Augustus. So we go from the civil wars between Caesar and Pompey, which you've touched on a little bit here and there. I'm going to make this a little bigger now. Over the course of the last couple of years, there have been mentions of this Caesar and Pompey civil war we see. And then we have Cicero and Caesar. What generally were these guys doing? Who were they? Cicero was a famous orator, obviously, and became famous by making legal cases against conspirators and people who were trying to harm the Republic. The most famous of which would be a guy named Catiline. So we'll get to that. More in the second part here, where you see Cicero denounces Catiline. But there will be a general introduction to Cicero and Caesar, who they are, the Civil War itself, what happened to Pompey during the Civil War against Caesar, and Caesar's assassination and the rise of his grandnephew Octavian, who then went on to become Augustus, as we see down here. The fall of the Republic. This is the actual meat of the civil wars: Republicans versus Caesarians, and then Antony versus Octavian. So basically, the first triumvirate, and the second triumvirate, and the sort of collapse of those two political alliances, and what that meant for Rome. And one person emerged supreme from all of that political chaos, and that was the Emperor Augustus, formerly known as Octavius and then Octavian. So that will keep us busy for the next probably month at least, I would say. Then part two is a general sort of review of a couple of writers, more on Cicero. Cicero is, kind of a really fascinating guy, a lawyer, made it like a guy from a very humble family, not a famous, wealthy, senatorial class family, but a sort of simple family, and he was known as a novus homo, which means a new man, a man without any real lineage and any kind of real family pedigree in Rome. And so he had to make his way up the old-fashioned way by hard work, essentially. So one of his most famous cases was against a guy named Verres, who was a corrupt governor or a proconsul in Sicily, and Sicily was this very important province for Rome, and this guy Verres was basically raping Sicily on a daily basis, taking its goods, taking wealth from its citizens, and enriching himself. So more on Cicero there. Then we have the famous case of Cicero denouncing Catiline, who is this kind of somewhat desperate guy who tried to basically seize power in a kind of insane conspiracy. So we'll see what goes on there. And then we have a couple of writings from Caesar, from his Gallic Wars. Caesar made his fortune in Gaul. He was the proconsul or a consul in basically went into Gaul, modern day France, and took over or basically conquered most of it or all of it, and enriched himself by doing all that conquest and sending lots of stuff back to the Romans to sort of make himself famous from his many, many military conquests in Gaul. And so we have kind of like a fun description of like these two centurions, which are, basically soldiers in his army competing against each other in a kind of rivalry. And HBO's show called Rome actually chose this section of Caesar's commentaries on Gaul as the sort of basis or the foundation for two of the main characters that are in HBO's Rome. I think I've showed you some of it, but I can't remember now. So that rivalry, and then some interesting customs of the Gauls. They have their own religious observances, including human sacrifice and all kinds of weird stuff that you'll see. I think we'll probably end up skipping over a good chunk of Catullus simply because I'm not a huge fan of his. A lot of his poetry is just sort of, I'm not saying he's not a good poet. I'm not really in a position to judge like just how great of a poet he is, honestly, but I find the subject matter to be like a little bit whimsical and often sort of tawdry and dirty, a lot of it, and I'm sure that draws the attention of teenagers. But and actually, none of the dirty poetry shows up here, but it's a lot of love poetry. And maybe we'll get a couple of them, but I think we're gonna, because of time, we'll end up having to skip a fair amount of that. And then Cicero comes back here in chapter 63. On writing on friendship. So Cicero was not only a lawyer and a senator and a consul ultimately, but he was also a philosopher and really loved the pursuit and study of Greek philosophy and wrote a number of sort of philosophical treatises on different subjects, one of which is the De Amicitia, which is on friendship. And it seems strange that we would have to have a written treatise on what friendship is, but this is the kind of thing that the Greeks and ultimately some of the Romans really had a lot of great interest in defining what these things are that we take for granted. What is friendship? What constitutes what a friend is? What are the pleasures that can be drawn from friendship? What is a real friendship and what is simply a friendship of convenience? These are the kind of questions that ultimately you will ask yourselves as you go through your lives, and Cicero has a lot to say about that subject. So I think I'll stop with that as regards like what we'll be covering. I think that could really take us up until close to the end of the year, depending on how fast or slow we go here. I'm hoping to go farther than that, but these 2 pages could certainly take a couple of months right here, and we're already closing in on March. So one other thing I asked you to look at was, hold on, I'm not sure if I'm going the right way here, to read this introduction to get a general sense of the politics and the history that are going on to ground you in the readings. So we have a little bit of background on who Marius was. We talked about Marius last year, Marius and Sulla, and then Caesar, and then Augustus again establishing this principate where he is the sort of first citizen of the princeps. You've seen that from the very first reading we had together back in 7th grade, princeps. Now you're actually going to see the princeps in action here in these readings. But I'm not going to dwell on that now, but I am interested in how to read this stuff. And I think that this right here, Steps to Effective Reading, is worth having a look over once or twice. But I'll focus on the main things. First of all, don't try to go through word by word. Read the entire sentence. This is good advice here. Read through the whole sentences. And these sentences do get long. You're going to see sentences that go on for 3, 4, 5 lines sometimes. And it can be very daunting and frightening, and you may feel the urge to simply give up, but I'm here to tell you that the more you do it, the better it will be. So read through the whole thing, or at least read up until a semicolon, let's say, until you hit a semicolon, to get kind of like a bird's eye view of the passage. Going through line by, like word by word, is not going to be effective. So read through these parts here. You will have to read all the sentence and then reread it. And then this is a critical point here. Observe whether the sentence is divided into smaller units, such as clauses or phrases. Use the punctuation that didn't exist in the original Latin. Use the punctuation to guide you. If there are clauses that are set off by commas, that will make life easier. It's to not just one long string of words, but look for how the sentence is broken up using punctuation wherever possible. And then you're going to be given a lot of vocabulary, a lot of new vocabulary, and you're also going to be given plenty of notes to guide you on how phrases are put together in English. So you really do have a lot of guidance from the left-hand side of the pages, as I'll show you in a second here. So that's important. Read through everything. Try to notice the structure of a sentence. Look for clauses that are set off by commas. Look for ablative absolutes. Look for relative clauses, like clauses that start with quis and quis and all of that. And maybe I'll get to an example of that in a minute. And keep rereading until the structure of the sentence starts to form in your mind. Again, word by word is not the way to go here. Let's see what else I can see here. Another general bit of good advice: dividing text into sense units. I'm gonna show you how to sort of kind of generally diagram these things. Not diagram like we did with those things that go like this, like the line and the line, but looking at the sentence, focusing on let's say finding the subject first. And this is probably something you're used to. What's the subject and what's the verb? I mean, that's still good advice. Where is the subject? What's the verb? And then notice the other clauses that sort of help that subject along. For example, and we'll see this soon enough, but here, this right here, Lucius Sergius Catilina, is the subject of the sentence. And notice how he's on a certain indent level here. And then this is also on that same indent level here, this ad delendam patriam coniuravit. So that is basically the skeleton of the sentence, right? Lucius Sergius Catilina conspired for the destruction of his country. And then everything else just sort of are clauses that sort of add more to that. Lucius Sergius Catilina, and then who is he? A man, a very noble man, but or a man of a noble, very noble family, but of depraved ingenuity, something like that. So that just tells us more about that subject. And then we have cum clauses, we have a prepositional clause here. So you'll see that we'll sort of try to find subject and try to find verb, and then just, put away the clauses on a different level in your mind, or maybe we'll practice writing these out or sort of diagramming them out so that it's not quite so complicated. So for now, I think what I'm going to do is, again, I would have a look over all of this introduction again. It's been several days at least since you've had a look at it. So read through that carefully. But this is what I asked you to look at for back, a week ago, I guess. This is starting with Cicero and Caesar. So we see a picture here. This is a picture of Catiline, and he's mentioned here, Lucius Sergius Catilina here. This is Catiline, and the story goes that as Cicero, who's pictured here in this painting, talked on and on more and more about Catiline and exposed the plot that Catiline was attempting to foist on Rome, the more Cicero talked, supposedly, the more these senators moved away from Catiline and left him all by himself on this bench here, as he sort of just very effectively exposed the full extent of the plot that had been revealed to Cicero. So we'll have a little bit on Cicero and Caesar here. These are taken from a book by a guy named Eutropius, and breviarium is something like short lives or short histories. You get from brevis, short. And you'll see that these passages go rather quickly. They're kind of summaries and summations of large historical events. But let's start with this. Now, if you went back a couple of pages, you'd see that this is the sentence, which is sort of diagrammed out. So we have this long sort of ablative ablative absolutes and then ablative of times to establish the timing of what's going on here. So this is basically when Marcus Tullius Cicero was orator and also Gaius Antonius. No, yeah, when these two were consuls. Let's remember that Roman consuls always come in pairs. So this is how Romans established time. Who were the consuls at a particular time? So here, Cicero himself and a guy named Gaius Antonius, about whom I don't know too much, were the consuls, and then it gives furthermore in an ablative sort of time here, anno ab urbe condita sexcentesimo nonagesimo primo. If you recognize anno ab urbe condita, AUC, those are again the year from the founding of the city. So here we have sexcentesimo nonagesimo primo, 691 years from the foundation of the city. So that's one of those, subtract 691 from 753 and you have the BC year essentially there. Lucius Sergius Catilina, a man of a noble race, but of something like wicked or corrupt, very corrupt character or ingenuity or intelligence. He conspired for the destruction of his country with certain famous men, quibusdam claris, but also daring or desperate men, I would say here. So with certain famous or well-regarded men, but men of a kind of daringness or boldness beyond what is acceptable here. And then we got a short sentence. Take a breath. A Cicerone urbe expulsus est. So he was expelled from the city by Cicero. Socii eos here, his meaning Catalines, so his friends or his associates, meaning in the conspiracy. Deprehensi, having been arrested or seized. Strangulati sunt, in carcere, in prison or in jail. Strangulati sunt, they were strangled. Notice that strangulati is not given on the side here, but you should be able to put that together. Strangulati sunt, they were strangled in prison. Ab Antonio altero consule, Catalina ipse victus proilo est interfectus. This is not a particularly hard sentence. I think Eutropius is chosen because he's not incredibly difficult. So we see Catalina here is the subject. This is a prepositional phrase here. Ab Antonio altero consule, by Antonius, the other consul. Catiline, and then we have the subject. Interfectus est is the verb. Catiline was killed. Catiline himself was killed in battle, proilio. We see down here, proilium. After he was conquered in battle, he was killed, something like that. Catiline himself, having been conquered in battle, was killed, or having been defeated, was killed in battle. It's hard to tell there. So I think that's the first 5 lines of what I asked you to go up to, and then maybe I can just take over from there with this video having been watched now. So we'll go up to line 11, I think is what I asked you to do. And I guess that's it for now.